All right. Thank you ever so much for joining us once again. Uh, this is our second episode of the genealogy lecture series for this fall. And we have with us three fantastic speakers, Megan, Sarah, and Nancy from the University of North Carolina's Chapel Hill Wilson Library. And they are going to talk to us about family history research in records of enslavement and beyond at Wilson Library. So without further ado, we will give them the floor and let the presentation begin. Thank you ever so much.
Hey there, everyone. I am first up to bat here. I will introduce myself, and I'm really grateful to be here to learn from you all and to share some about the really amazing work I feel like we're doing at Wilson to support descendants like yourselves. And my um, component of the presentation is about public services and archives, and how, as a public services librarian, a reference librarian, I work directly with descendants to help them build their family trees, tell stories, and research local and family history. And Megan, my colleague, who you will meet shortly, is going to be driving the slides here. And so if there's any issue, just put, if with audio or anything, just put something in the chat and I will continue. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a reference and instruction librarian at UNC Chapel Hill. My place is work in Wilson Special Collections Library, which is it is an archive, and full of unpublished materials that we call manuscripts of a wide variety of formats, as well as published and print material. So that makes us a special collections library. And so I just wanted to, if anything is a takeaway, I just want for you to know that archives are really important for your family history research and your genealogy research, and that people like myself are really, really important partners for you. So I have been a librarian and an educator for my entire career at Wilson Special Collections Library, at a public institution. We work with people all over the world. So you do not need to be a UNC Chapel Hill affiliate to come to our library, to access our collections, to reach out to me with any type of question whatsoever, whether it's potentially about our collections or not. Um, and I love working with folks from all over the country and all over the world. I myself, I have done my own family history, and I um, professionally work with genealogical subjects and methodologies. I'm not a board certified genealogist, and I am not a genealogy librarian per se, but it will become apparent why I do so much work with genealogical methodologies based on the types of collections we have at Wilson. I myself am an active member of some local history organizations like the Chapel Hill Historical Society, and I am the book reviewer for the North Carolina Genealogical Society as well. So I really appreciate and gain a lot from that experience. My subject specialty is North Carolina, actually. So history, people, culture of North Carolina. I find that whenever there's a question about a town, a municipality, any location, that is also family history because we're telling all of these stories intertwined necessarily. So genealogy inevitably comes into play. Um, so Megan, would you mind going to the next slide? Um, okay, let's see. Sorry, Megan. Megan is driving. I'm so sorry. Um,
I apologize because on my screen I'm seeing the transition. Hold on one second. Are we not moving forward?
No, just says 7 of 59.
Okay, hold on one second. Sorry about that.
I
Okay.
think I don't know if there's like a different mode for,
Yes, I believe there is a presenter mode that functions
Yeah,
about the same way, but it presents differently to the audience.
let's
Uh,
see. All right, what are we seeing now?
at this point, we don't see the slideshow
Anything?
at all.
Okay. This is literally one of my biggest fears. So I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay, let's see. Content only. Share. Nope. Yes. Okay. And
and
I'm gonna go
yeah,
into presentation mode.
I would go to, if you just do slideshow, or I don't have any notes. If you did slideshow and
Okay.
just start from beginning, then, or yeah, either one of those, and then,
Okay. Are we
yeah,
seeing the?
that's looking good to me.
Okay. All right.
Yay. Okay. Um, we got it now. Sorry. Coming back into the story. Sorry. Um, so some of this is going to be entirely obvious to you all, or maybe some of this is, just some helpful tips and reminders. But I try to keep some of these overarching themes, tenets, like right at the forefront of my work supporting descendants, because these are really helpful rules, if you will, and like just sort of notions concerning archival research that will help you be successful. Um, so every person's experience is different. And that is a challenge. It is also an opportunity. um, and so any endeavor like this, I'm sure you're already experiencing this, but certainly when it comes to approaching the archive and working within archives, which can be really idiosyncratic. There are a lot of surprises. There are a lot of things missing. It is not prescribed. So your experience is not prescribed because the record is imperfect. So we don't know, I don't know oftentimes what's going to happen. So that's why partnering with someone like myself is really important. But that is, an opportunity to think really creatively about what's possible. You may know this as well, but being in academia, uh, genealogy is not like other types of scholarly research. So, in my position as a research and instruction librarian, I teach research practice and teach how to do research in archives. And genealogy is its own unique approach. And it is technically outside of the academy. So even in like the history departments, genealogy as a methodology is not actually taught. So this is a very specific type of approach. It is rigorous and based on evidence. But so it's interesting to do research in archives, especially institutional archives, academic libraries like ours, because it is just, on the outside of other scholarly life cycles and research approaches. Um, you will not find answers to every question. Just to put that right out there, there is always something you can't answer, but we can make educated guesses based on the available evidence. Okay, so we continue to push and think creatively so that we can say if we have A and C, we can figure out how A plus B equals C. We can find that B, or we can make the argument that, what B could be if we have A and C, right? So it's sort of like, these kind of mathematical concepts too. But one thing that I do as well is, yes, I work at Wilson Special Collections Library, but if I'm going to support folks like yourselves in doing your genealogical research, I have to also consider what's out there beyond Wilson Special Collections Library necessarily. Okay, it requires being nimble and flexible. Okay, so when questions come to me and I look in our collections and, we may not be able to answer all the questions or any of the question with our collections, I don't stop there. Okay, so, and this is also something I'm touching on, but you not find all of your answers in just one type of record or at one location, one archive. You have to consider all the archives. And again, a person like myself is here to help you find those places. So don't feel like you have to do it on your own. Geography, place, it is absolutely central to this work. I am the North Carolina subject librarian, and so place is everything to me. The South is everything to me. Because our collections are 4 out of our 5 collecting areas are really focused on the American South. And I'll talk a little bit more about what archives choose to collect, but that is our specialty. When people come to me with their family history questions, my first question is, if we don't already know, or I don't already know, is where. I need to know where. Let's at least get it down to the state, but I need it to be even more specific. Okay. And I'm on that journey with you. And don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged. Because, I don't like to close any door, but, I'm also in the game of, being realistic as well. So it's sort of a balance, right? Of reality and also persistence, and continuing to work. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Megan. Okay, so again, some of this is, I know you all are coming from lots of different places, but working from within archives, we need records, documents, sources, right? And so the archive is dependent upon somebody having written something down, created a record, generated something that is tangible. Okay, so like back in the day, we're talking about people putting pen to paper, taking a photograph. Something has to be like recorded in some sort of tangible form that can then be brought into an archive. Now we're getting things that are what we call born digital. They're like files on a computer, or like stored on a hard drive, right? So, but still, that it is information recorded. Okay, the archive is the repository, the depository for that type of material. Archives are all over the place. Wilson Special Collections Library is a part of an academic library system at an institution, a public university. Okay, but there are archives big and small. There are personal archives. There are local archives at public libraries, historical societies, all kinds. So the archive is all over the place, right? But there are conventions, and fundamentally, it requires somebody recording something, saving it, depositing it, somehow getting it into an archive, and then people like us, Megan and Nancy and I, working to help make it accessible and saved and conserved for the indefinite future. And so something that I keep at the forefront too, there are a lot of things that were never recorded. In navigating this world of genealogy, you get to know, and it can vary from state to state. It can, depend on the time period. The farther back you go, the less likely things were written down because we had fewer, state entities, like formal entities that required record keeping. And so, you start to learn some of these conventions based on historical time period or location and things like that. But many records, just realistically speaking, haven't been saved, or they were recorded and then lost and not saved, and they didn't end up in the archive, any archive. Okay. So there are things that we have to just sort of consider, like, is it still out there? Could it be archived? Can we potentially access it? So this is part of the journey. Thank you, Megan. So next slide. Okay. When you are, usually someone like myself is your first point of contact, but not always. When you are approaching an archive, the Public Services Department, reference librarians, usually that's your first point of contact because you are reaching out with a question. Okay. And the question usually comes to a person like myself. We do, we answer reference questions, we teach, we do outreach, we build exhibits, and basically, like, we facilitate access and engagement with the collections. We have great representation here from, so Nancy is going to talk to you about work in technical services, archival processing. So this is cataloging, processing, description. This is very high level. There's so much more, but these are kind of the biggies. And based on the work that our colleagues are doing in technical services, maybe a processing archivist is your first point of contact, okay? Or curatorial. Megan, who works in the curatorial unit of the Southern Historical Collection, one of our collecting areas and themes, those staff members acquire materials, work with donors, and build the collections, basically. We also have a really important set of digitization experts that we work with. We are really, really lucky at Wilson to have a dedicated digital scanning department. Not all libraries and archives have that, but we are really lucky to be able to provide that service. And so we have basically professional trained photographers on staff, and these people help us make our collections accessible. So, and I work really closely with colleagues in our digital production center. And so all of us are experts in subject matter and methodology. And I work on special projects with descendants alongside some of my colleagues in the digital production center, actually, because we need to get scans and versions of our physical holdings into people's hands, because not everybody can come and visit us. Okay. Next slide. So just thinking sort of about the archive and how it's structured. And one thing that I just really encourage people to think about, when you're doing genealogy, I mean, of course, you need like the public records, the vital records, census, birth certificates, death certificates. But what happens when you are looking at a collection of a wide variety of formats, family papers, personal papers, institutional records? The archive is really, really varied as far as types of records. All of these things are at your potential disposal. Okay. One of my biggest tools is the newspaper. And one thing that we do really well at Wilson is we have extensive holdings of North Carolina newspapers. So we can't collect, even though we look across the entire South as well as North Carolina and our institution, we aren't going to be really great at collecting stuff from South Carolina or Virginia necessarily. there are other institutions like our sibling institutions like UVA, University of South Carolina. They have their own state's newspapers, and we're all digitizing this stuff. Okay, so when you reach out to a person like me, you know, also people don't have family histories just confined to like one state, right? So I'm going to say, I need to hook you up, you know, with Virginia newspapers. I need to hook you up with like South Carolina newspapers, Mississippi newspapers. Who has them? Who's been digitizing them? Who's put them online? Well, we do North Carolina. Okay, so this is huge. Maps, just to kind of like get you thinking, maps are really useful actually. Like we have, just as an example, we have that I have found really useful for helping folks is we have manuscript maps, so unpublished maps, but also published maps like Postal Service, rural delivery route maps published by the United States Postal Service that are historical. And so often they will have every single, like a snapshot from like 1925, every single little structure, because that postal delivery driver cannot miss a house. And so they have this map on on the on the front seat there next to them, and they have their routes and they're following them. And they're like, here's a house, here's a house, here's a house. I see it on the map. And we can triangulate that with other maps as well, like fire insurance maps, other street level maps. It's really, really an interesting opportunity to think about how these maps as historical sources of information can be useful. Photographs, any images, these can be really, really revealing. Oral interviews. I did mention the public and vital records. So, you know, in North Carolina, like in other states, we're talking about records generated by the state government are going to be ingested, deposited with the state archives. Okay. We may have copies of that stuff, but, you know, or like maybe copies of wills that are in people's personal papers, but we aren't going to have, like deeds. Those are with our county register of deeds office. So again, you know, a person like myself is going to be like, this is where you should look, making recommendations, but of course, starting with what we have. Okay. But just to know, like, digitization is a big part of what we do and a big part of our service. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So physical records. Okay, so just to kind of put this out there, just to add to your toolbox, right? Libraries, archives, special collections libraries, these places hold records that are private, right? Like family papers or like the records of organizations or businesses, sometimes public records, and we, depending on our resources, we make them accessible, right? In a variety of different ways. So just think about where records could be. And again, just reaching out to a person like myself, I'm like, where could this stuff be? I don't, yes, I'm going to look at what we have first, but if we don't have it, where could it be? Right? Public libraries, colleges, schools, historical societies, genealogical associations, alumni organizations, like, you know, let's think of it all, okay? If it's physical and not digitized, do you need to travel to see it? Okay, so we're thinking about research plans, time commitments, financial investments, like do I need to travel? Do not, this is the thing, do not assume though that you need to travel. It's always great to see the thing in person, but reach out first because they may be able to scan it for you, and then you have at least, this version in hand, as well as maybe at some point being able to go and visit in person, which is also extremely meaningful, informative, and something that we prioritize, as far as like your experience and try to support you in facilitating that. But just to say again, now I can't speak for all public services librarians working in archives, but if somebody's in touch with me about their family history project, I cannot just say like, well, this is what we have, and then that's the end of the conversation. I will ask you, like, have you been accessing public and vital records? If not, how can I help you get to that? Even if it's like through like your local public library, like, does your local public library have an ancestry subscription? A lot of the libraries in North Carolina offer that. So I can just sort of counsel how to navigate the entire world of archives and records, not just limited to what we do, because otherwise, you know, um, it's I'm not providing the best service that I can. Being a librarian, a professional reference librarian, means that I'm constantly referring folks to my colleagues, and I know who they are, right? And I want to know how to help you navigate this world. So next slide. So we talked about public records. I feel like I don't want to assume that this is just, something that you all have already delved into, but just know like there are different levels, right, of like these record generating entities, right? So think of it like nested dolls. Okay, like we want to get down to the very, very local level, like families who maybe have been collecting records. How about the municipality? Where are those local government records? Register of Deeds, state level government. Um, who is, what kind of records do they generate? Where can I find those? Of course, federal government. That's where, they're the ones directing the census, but there's also national archives, which could contain military records, immigration records, all kinds of things. Okay, so again, this is the world that, I, as a professional, I'm trying to help you navigate. And I've definitely learned some lessons along the way, and I'm happy to relay those. Okay, but just sort of think about this as like my archive, Wilson Special Collections Library, is just one part of this nested doll kind of like hierarchy, if you will, or like just different levels of record generating entities and then like depositories. Okay. All right. Next slide. All right. So archives are invaluable to genealogy. Archives, an individual archive like ours, for example, we can't collect everything. We shouldn't collect everything. Not everything is, like we do the South, we do North Carolina, we do Chapel Hill, but we don't have everything. And frankly, we shouldn't. We don't need to, as like a large institution, bring everything to us. um, I firmly, don't believe in that, frankly. We need to think, we work in new ways where it's not like completely, we're not extracting, we're not taking. We are working with communities, we are working with folks, okay? Like, we help folks archive them, collect and share and hold their own stories and archives as well. But just know that, Duke University down the street from us, they have their own collecting specialties based in theme or subject or geography. Okay. We have a rare book collection, but then the other four collecting areas have something to do with the American South, right? So if you have ancestors in the South, consider us, okay? Because that is something that, be in touch with me, and then, or one of us, and we will help you, okay? And I make another point here about like basically how an archive is built, which is like, I talked about how not everything has been recorded, saved, and then deposited. And so therefore the archive is always incomplete. That's just how it is, and like even these official entities like the federal government, you think, like all of us know now looking at the census that that is a mess. Like the census is a mess. We're talking about messy data, like, and like my grandmother was born like basically in a swamp, like at home in Carteret County, North Carolina in 1920, and she has no birth certificate. North Carolina started issuing birth certificates in 1913. Why didn't she have a birth certificate? That's because there was no hospital, and there may have been like a country doctor attending, but like record keeping wasn't necessarily, even after all that time, it wasn't extending to like really rural areas, right? Like these like systems of public health and things like that. So like it influences like the archive, like what's there, okay? And oftentimes there are silences or gaps not due to this issue of like the record, not being generated, but also because of made by people who run the archive. This is a very old, library, and we're working, with collections, and decisions and things, interventions by people who came before us. Okay, so it's like at every step there's an intervention and like a person, people who are making decisions about what's valuable and what's not valuable. Okay, so it's just good to sort of think about that as like the big picture, but again, it's just a way to navigate. Okay. And it's not like a door closing. It's just like a way to like be successful. All right, next slide. Okay, how do I get people started at Wilson? I receive lots of different types of questions. I understand, or I've heard that, or many of you may be working with DNA now. I actually rarely get questions still. I mean, it could change, like where people have DNA results and they're starting with that as like, that's their starting point. And then we're trying to basically connect the record to what information they have. I get everything from my family from North Carolina to like people who have already gotten into our collections and our description, and they're like, you have this specific thing that I'm looking for. So basically a reference librarian like myself is, we call it a reference interview, but basically like you reach out to a person like me and I'm going to ask you some more questions, like what have you done? What have you found to be successful? What are your goals? Where do you want to go? What information is missing? Okay. And again, it's like sometimes people are like, I would do my family history, and they are starting like literally from scratch. I work with everybody. Like I just try to meet you where you're at. Okay. And then it's on to our description, right? And of course, like what we have digitized, like I'm going to share stuff that they can grab from the internet, give them tips of how to find it. But just know that a library catalog with like records of books and things like that, like if you're Googling, you're not going to be able to figure out like what books we have in our library at UNC Chapel Hill. You have to intentionally go to our library catalog to search for it. But this will transition to what Nancy's going to talk about. Our inventories, for all intents and purposes, I call them inventories, are like lists of things that are in manuscript, like collections, family papers, organizational records, things like that. We call them finding aids. Those are scraped by Google. And so sometimes when you're Googling, so I encourage people to Google all day, because you could end up in one of our finding aids, one of our collections. Okay. Please do that. Like, and you will get our contact information too. You're like, I'm doing North Carolina genealogy, and hopefully you'll end up in one of my subject guides that I put online. And then like my email address is there, and I can't wait to talk to you. Okay. So, it's so just know that like you can start by Googling and end up with us, or, you can intentionally go to our library portal and start like searching within our description. It's all good. It's all good. So, and I help you all, like to whatever extent is helpful, learn how to do that in our collections, but anywhere, any library catalog, any library is finding aids, right? So I'd like to help you on your journey. All right, next slide. Okay. Um, just a really quick point. Do we have collections that could help you? Okay. So basically, like if you're researching enslaved ancestors, do we even have the papers of these enslaving families? To be honest with you, of all the genealogy questions I get, a very, very small percentage of the folks I work with are finding their ancestors in the papers of enslavers that we hold. Because, maybe the papers of these enslavers are at another library, like University of Mississippi or something like that. Um, but this is why, going back, I need to have all these other tools and resources at my disposal, newspapers, maps, things like that, because we aren't going to always have the papers of these enslavers. If we do have the papers of enslavers, what's even there? So this is something that my colleagues will talk about, but just the sheer fact of the matter is that enslavers actually didn't, based on the time period, they didn't have to keep records. When tax time came around, it was a poll tax. It's just sheer numbers. And sometimes, we have the papers of enslavers where they kept really detailed records because that was their style, and then they also saved them. Like, here is a list of births. Here is a list of names at different plantations. I've saved they saved every single bill of sale, or a lot of them. But most enslavers, because they didn't have to keep those records, because of the record keeping requirements of the time, they just, sometimes we'll have the papers of enslavers, but it's like nothing related to the people that they enslaved, and then just like other parts of their lives. Looking in the financial series, that's where I recommend people to go, and then correspondence as well to see if enslaved people are mentioned. But this is just, realistically speaking, very time consuming. Slavery era manuscripts are in handwriting script, like written hand. A lot of it hasn't been digitized, but we're trying our best. We're talking about a lot of stuff that has not been transcribed. Okay, so this is something else that we want to talk to you about, which is like, what do you need? How can we help you? Like with the reading, with the digitization, with the transcription. So these are some things that we want to work with you on. Okay, next slide. And I'm just going to really briefly, let's skip over that. Those are some tips that you can have. I just wanted to really quickly just talk about a specific engagement, long-term engagement of ours, but also specifically mine, working with descendants of enslaved people in Chapel Hill, where a lot of folks in Chapel Hill, their families have been in town for hundreds of years. Their enslaved ancestors labored at the university. Some of them were enslaved by faculty members, members of the Board of Trustees, townspeople. So, trying to help them find their ancestors in our collections, think creatively about how we can talk more and understand more about slavery in Chapel Hill and at UNC. And how can our study of slavery at UNC help descendants with their own work and the stories that they want to tell? I have a screenshot from an exhibit that has been useful for like more than a decade, well, more than a decade, I think 20 years, right? But slavery at UNC is an ongoing investigation, and it is something that we are doing. It's not being told to us that we should do this. We're working with descendants to try and tell these stories and looking in our collections. So next slide. Just to say, UNC is a public institution and never, as an organization, enslaved people, never owned enslaved people. And yet our institution benefited immensely from slavery in a variety of ways. And so how do we understand that complicity so that we can support descendants and to really think about reparations and reckoning? Just to say, our university was built by enslaved people, so we can look in our university archives for records like this one, which was a bill, and for labor and materials for building certain structures on campus, but it lists specific names. And then the next slide, as cheats. So the university received money for what was considered abandoned property, and it still is a way that UNC Chapel Hill receives money. And so during the slavery era, what this meant was that enslaved people as property, if an estate was abandoned, or someone died without a will, or there was some sort of a dispute, the property, including enslaved people, oftentimes ended up in a kind of limbo state. And if it was unclaimed, the university could sell that property and receive the money. This is a very, very complicated, well, it's complicated and also not complicated, but the fact is we can look at our university papers and really get a lot of insight into this system. And one of our endeavors is to get the names of people that the university trafficked, essentially, to benefit financially the university. And so that's what we're looking for, but also maybe try to understand more of how much, get some hard numbers, how much money are we actually talking about, that the university enriched itself through this system. All right, one more slide from me, I believe. And so also renting, this is huge. I mean, not just for UNC and descendants I work with in Chapel Hill, and not just across North Carolina. We're talking about a really, really important part of this slavery system that we can see represented oftentimes in our archives, and where we find the names of enslaved people is the renting of their labor. This is really, I think, I mean, it's known, but it's to a large extent unexamined. And we can look in some family papers, like these battle family papers, and they were a UNC family, faculty, board of trustees, etc., administrators, who regularly basically rented the people that they enslaved in town and in a variety of different ways, as a way to add to their profits. And so this is really, really important, and something that I look for to help descendants. So I'm gonna pass it on, hopefully starting to talk about papers and finding aids transitions to my colleague Nancy. And thank you so much. I'm going to turn off my audio.
Hi, can you hear me? I'll assume yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Nancy Kaiser. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Many thanks to Shannon Christmas for the invitation to join you, and to my colleagues Sarah and Megan for sharing their perspectives, and to all of you for being here today on a Saturday. I'm a technical services archivist at UNC, where I have worked since 2000. I arrange and describe archival collections for the Southern Historical Collection and the Southern Folklife Collection in Wilson Library. I've been working on the remediation of slavery era collections for the last 5 years or so. And to me, it's the most important work I've done, and it's the honor of my career to be able to do it. Next slide, please. Wilson Library, specifically, one slide back. Yeah, thank you. Wilson Library, specifically the Southern Historical Collection, has about 700 slavery era collections that were collected beginning in the 1930s to document the experience of largely wealthy, politically and socially influential white families throughout the South. Not surprisingly, many of those families enslaved people or were in a financial position to traffic enslaved people through the hiring in or out of their labor skills and knowledge. That slavery permeated the pages of these 700 collections went unspoken in the original archival description tools, the finding aids that Sarah mentioned. In the 1980s, many of these collections got a finding aid rewrite as part of a University Publications of America microfilming project that was called Records for Antebellum Southern Plantations from the Revolution through the Civil War. The new and improved finding aids accounted for the study of slavery in ways that previous finding aids had not, but the archival description was still written for a scholarly audience with only the study of slavery, the institution, in mind. On the plus side, there were more pointers to where to find records of enslavement in these collections, but individuals were rarely highlighted, and the silence around the humanity of enslaved people remained a problem. Fast forward to the present, and we are returning to these finding aids to remediate the legacy description of the 1980s. Thankfully, our thinking around the audiences that archival description serves now includes not just scholars writing dissertations and monographs and journal articles, but also undergraduate students who are learning to use primary sources and genealogists looking for enslaved ancestors. Today, I'm going to tell you about some of the ways we are remediating our archival description to be more inclusive to the needs and perspectives of these wider audiences. Before I get to the specifics, I want to pick up the through line of community engagement that Sarah mentioned with the history of the university projects and just generally working closely with people in the public, and that Megan will also talk about. Our descriptive practices are always evolving. That's part of our job as library and archives professionals. But I want to make sure I credit the genealogy community who have been so generous with feedback that shapes this remediation work. In 2022 and 2023, we interviewed 12 genealogists who specialize in African American family history and records of enslavement. We learned so much from their willingness to share about their own experiences as researchers and their ideas for how to improve the experience and success of researchers like themselves and into the future. We wrote 2 reports about the interviews and posted them online to a GitHub website. And I've heard from others in the archives profession who've leaned on this guidance for their own repositories, so that the genealogical spirit of generosity has informed the profession beyond just Wilson Library. We've kept in touch with several of those interviewees, and they continue to partner with us to improve descriptive practices and explore new ways of doing this work. Next slide, please. Okay, so now for the specifics of our remediation work. Every one of our slavery era collections has a finding aid, and every finding aid has an abstract. Typically, the opening line of the abstract will include a little bit of biographical information to set the stage. Until recently, we didn't include slavery as part of that biography. One of the first things we want to do is recenter enslaved and free people of color as people who are important in any archival collection in which they appear. Next slide. Okay, this is an example of an updated abstract. We want to let researchers know upfront that the collection long ago was named for the white families, but there are other people who can be found here too. We add the racial identifier white because whiteness should not be the assumed norm. I'm not going to show you the before versions because it's too much reading on screen, but if you're curious, the Internet Archive keeps a record of the past versions of our finding aids, and I can provide links to those during the Q&A if anyone is interested. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here's another example of a remediated abstract where we point out facts that previously went unstated. Okay, next slide. In this example, we are calling out formats that Sarah, she pointed out all these different places to look. Deeds, indentures, wills, lists of enslaved people, estate papers, ledgers, whatever records document lives of enslaved people. We want to make sure that we're highlighting those formats in the finding aid so that people, target those as places to look first. Okay, next slide, please. In this example, we want to acknowledge when Black people are the creators of documentation and when they are represented from white people's perspective, which is most often the case. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Many of our 1980s slavery era collections contain venerative description of the wealthy white families with no mention of them being enslavers. Undergraduate students were the first to call us out about this dishonest description. And even though they generally encounter our description as part of a single session of a class that someone like Sarah might be teaching, or in a short-term assignment that brings them to the archives for just one visit, we still want to keep them in mind as we rewrite description. We don't want to drive away future generations of researchers with description that offends. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here's another rewritten abstract that lets you know from the get-go who William Eaton is in the context of this collection. This doesn't make this collection any easier to encounter for someone researching their ancestors, but we hope that it is a slightly better experience if you don't have to wade through language that glorifies an enslaver or obscures an enslaver by giving them the title of planter. Okay, next slide, please. With regard to subject headings, we are globally applying a single heading to tie together all of our slavery era collections and selectively using others to facilitate research across collections. We're also making sure to add subject headings for plantation place names, which Sarah mentioned how important geography is to this kind of work. We want to make sure that, we're providing, state, county, towns, and place and plantation place names too, because that is often, something, a piece of information that might have trickled down to the present, and it's something to go on. Okay, next slide, please. This slide has the main subject headings we are using. Most of these have been in use since the 1980s, but I want to point out the enslavers one. Actually, I'll point out first the ones that are highlighted. Those are the global ones we're using, so that we can tie all 700 collections together eventually. Okay, but the enslavers, that one is new, and it was the suggestion of Renata Sanders, a genealogist from our first and second interview projects, and who has been a great friend to us as we have been working on remediation. She has provided feedback or suggestions for so many things that fall under the category of best practices that we are striving to meet. In this case, she pointed out that people may have been enslaved by one person, but their labor skills and knowledge were trafficked out to another enslaver. Renata opened our eyes to researchers who might want to know who all the enslavers are by county so that they have another way of following people whose movements were controlled by enslavers. Next slide, please. Finally, we're doing a deep dive or a deep read into the collections to surface the names of enslaved people. Sometimes there are obvious places to look for enslaved people, such as lists kept by plantation owners or in the will of an enslaver, but most of the time it is like looking for a needle in the haystack. We want to facilitate this research as much as possible, especially given that so many of our researchers are not able to come on site, or they are dependent on digitization, which is a wonderful backup option, but it's not necessarily easy to work with, especially if your cursive reading skills are rusty. With 700 collections, the Deep Dive project is a massive undertaking. For now, when we are picking collections for deep dives, we prioritize researchers who have reached out to us with questions. So when we say don't hesitate to ask, which I hope that came through in Sarah's presentation, we really, really mean it. Please reach out, and we want to help, and especially when we have people who are asking for specific things. We also try to work on collections where we can support community partners for a greater impact. Megan will be talking about one such project on these grounds. Okay, next slide, please. Here's an example of a folder in the Hawkins family papers. This folder has many documents, but we want to highlight the ones that are records of enslavement. The second example does not include the names of the enslaved. The document does not include the names of the enslaved people, but we highlight it anyway with the thought that it may contain a clue that is meaningful to someone out there. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Next slide. As we remediate description in these finding aids, we want to be transparent about what we have done, so we add processing notes. These notes may be a little bit inside baseball for some, but for others, especially our longtime researchers, it's important contextual information about the collection. This first statement is a note that we are adding at the collection level for people who want to know more about the history of description at Wilson Library. The second statement is a note also at the collection level, and it tells you what parts of the finding aid have been amended. As I said a few slides ago, earlier versions of the finding aids are available upon request, although we do still need to get a statement about that into the finding aids so that people know to ask for it. Next slide, please. This is a note we use to indicate that we have done a deeper dive, but note the highlighted part at the end. We want to be clear that we may not have been comprehensive in our search. Sometimes we're able to go through an entire collection, and sometimes we're just, we're only able to do a few folders before we have to move on. So we want to make sure that people, I guess, trust but verify our work. Don't be afraid to keep looking. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we have a few other projects that are related to description that are going on simultaneously. I'm going to describe them very briefly, but feel free to follow up about them in the Q&A. The first is SNAC, which stands for Social Networks in Archival Context. My colleague, Jody Berkowitz, is working with this tool to help bring clarity to collections that have a lot of names repeated. For now, she is focused on the white people because we can differentiate them easily, and they are often necessary to the search for enslaved ancestors. This tool does not in any way replace Family Search or Ancestry or any of those platforms that you may be familiar with, but it can connect you to other repositories that may have related materials. The second and third projects are explorations with artificial intelligence transcription tools. The first AI project involved From the Page, an online crowdsourcing transcription platform. In 2024, we hosted a pilot project in which we test drove an early tool for automated transcription called Transcribus, coupled with ChatGPT. We scoped a section of the project to the Hawkins and Haywood family collections. A group of Hawkins and Haywood family members and friends, including Renata, who I mentioned earlier, and our host today, Shannon. And I also saw in the audience that Nikki is here. She also participated in this. And if there's anyone else who, if you joined after I last looked at the list of who's in the audience, please say hello and thank you for being here. I don't want to miss you in acknowledging. So a group of the Haywood and Hawkins family members and friends came together on a monthly basis to transcribe records of enslavement from these collections in From the Page. We didn't end up using the AI component very much because it was so clunky as to be inefficient, but we transcribed and we enjoyed being in community with each other. The project is over, but we continue to meet on a monthly basis to keep at the transcription work because it's never done. And we're working not just in Hawkins and Haywood, but other slavery collections as well. AI has come a long way since that project a year ago. And so now we have a similar but larger scale grant from the Mellon Foundation to explore the use of AI in making handwritten transcripts more accessible through automated transcription and indexing. We are testing many more of the tools you may have heard of: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, etc. So far, the results confirm that AI is not capable of working unsupervised by humans, but there is evidence that it will be able to help us move this work forward with more deliberate speed, if not accuracy, which remains the purview of humans. Okay, next slide, please. And this is my last slide. This is an example of a folder from the Hawkins family papers that includes a link to one of the transcriptions created by the Hawkins Haywood team. So that's a quick overview of where we are with archival description of slavery era collections at Wilson Library. Megan is up next to introduce you to the work she has been doing in deepening and extending African American family history research at Wilson. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am really excited and honored to be here, and I want to thank both Sarah and Nancy for giving really great presentations into the just amazing work that they do that informs the work that I do. So a bit about me. My name is Megan Alston, and I am the Assistant Curator for African American Collections in the Southern Historical Collection at Wilson Library. And in that role, I am responsible for acquiring, highlighting, and interpreting primary source material documenting the African American experience. For my part of the presentation, I am going to talk about curating African American family history in slavery and beyond. So first, I'm going to begin by briefly discussing curating records of slavery, and that encompasses both, collecting material and also exploring those records. Most of the collections that Sarah and Nancy have talked about they're extremely old. They're some of the oldest collections that we have in the SHC, and they were brought in by past curators. But curating records isn't just a static action, something that, one curator undertakes and then it's over. It's an ongoing process. Collecting priorities evolve over time, and those priorities are supported by the work of the curator. So past curators have been interested in these collections as a way of, documenting prominent families, but we're really interested in this, group of collections that Sarah and Nancy have talked about because they are a way to document the experiences of enslaved people. So documenting the lives and stories of enslaved people is one of our current collecting priorities. And the way that we support that is through a couple of ways. We still collect. We still are actively collecting in this area through a combination of what I call strategic legacy additions and new collections. So what that looks like is when we're contacted by a descendant of one of the original donors of some of these collections saying, hey, we have more material that we like to donate, and this is something that kind of happens fairly often. One of the considerations that we take into account when we're deciding, is this material something that we would like to add to our collections, is if it brings new or expanded documentation on not just the donor family, but the people who they enslaved. And it also means that we're open to collecting new documents and new material that document enslaved people as well. And these come to us through donations, and it also involves us, keeping our eyes out with like rare book dealers to see if there's any material that we would like to add to our collections. So this image right here is an example of some of our strategic additions. This is a picture of the last will and testament of David Rivers. And the original collection is one that we acquired, I believe, in the 1960s, 1970s. But this became available and we added it to the collection because since it's a will, it does have good documentation about the people that David Rivers enslaved and how they were being allotted to various family members. And this image right here is an example of a new collection that we acquired recently. This actually came to us through an archivist at Victoria College, which is part of the University of Toronto. And they had this bill of sale. It's for a young girl named Esther in North Carolina. They had this bill of sale in their collection and they didn't know what to do with it and felt that the Southern Historical Collection would be a good place for this item to be. So we were able to add it as a new collection. So curating doesn't stop at acquisition. It doesn't stop when materials get in the building. It also includes finding new ways to use and highlight existing collection strengths to tell new stories. So this is included working across teams to re-examine and refocus some of our archival description tools. So prior to me becoming the assistant curator for African American collections, I worked in the same department in more of a processing role. And I worked with Nancy to work with backlog material. So this is material that curators had brought in, but technical services hadn't processed yet, so it wasn't made available to researchers. So one of the additions that I was working with were a series of account books to our Clegg family papers. And in these account books, there were names of enslaved people, but also recently emancipated people. So Nancy and we had a conversation, in the stacks about how, this was, really important documentation. And, we were trying to figure out how we could bring this to the attention of, genealogists, researchers, and, people who could be interested. So from there, we really kind of began putting into practice what Nancy talked about with adding the names of enslaved people and people of color to the finding aid so that folks are able to search that way. And then another example of kind of a cross-team effort, collaboration effort, was Sarah and we were part of a project called the Antebellum Finding Aid Task Team, where we were tasked with developing recommendations for revamping the finding aids for these, slavery era collections and figuring out ways to uplift the stories and the documents that talk about the lives of enslaved people, and that included things like adding names, moving mentions of slavery and enslaved people to higher level notes like the bio notes and a few other things. And then another way that we're kind of furthering the exploration of records of enslavement and working with descendants is developing new tools like the On These Grounds database, which Nancy mentioned. So, On These Grounds is a data model that was originally created to provide insight into the lives of enslaved people in conjunction with institutes of higher education. It began at Michigan State, and Georgetown University was also one of the original partners who worked in developing this tool. So currently, On These Grounds, OTG is being used as a framework to build a database of searchable records of enslaved people and related events that are found in our library's manuscript collections. So while it began as narrowly focused um, on enslavement as it occurred with universities, because the Southern Historical Collection has so many of these, family papers, we decided to, broaden the scope of how the data model would be applied. So the growth and development of the database has in many ways been informed by descendant input. For example, when the idea came to expand the scope beyond the university, I had worked on a few occasions with descendants of Stagville Plantation, which is in modern day Durham, North Carolina. And Stagville Plantation was owned by the Cameron family. The Cameron family is papers are a collection that we have that has a lot of use. And so, the thought was, hey, let's see if we could use the Cameron family papers as, one of our main target collections because we know that there's a community there who might find this of interest. And then we also, as we were, developing records and designing the public-facing website for the project, we were able to conduct a focus group with descendants, a lot of descendants from the Stagville plantation, but just other folks who are descendants and who are interested in doing this type of genealogy work to develop our website and decide how things should be represented, what information is important, what information is not important. And the website is still a work in progress, but we are using the information and the insights that we were able to get from descendants to shape that development. So for the next few slides, I'm going to kind of briefly walk through our public website for On These Grounds. The website is public. It hasn't kind of been formally launched, but it's up there for folks to explore, give feedback, and we are still adding new records currently. So this is the homepage of our instance of On These Grounds, where you can look at background information about the project, UNC, and some of the history with enslavement that Sarah talked about, and also begin to explore records about people, events, different collections, and things of that nature. This page right here is where you can explore records of different people, and you're able to search by name, occupation, and then like significant location, so where a person was born or where a person was living, and this can be, different levels of specificity. So it can be like a plantation, a state, things of that nature, and you can also search by collection. And this is
No, so you actually, I think you have to hit share twice. So when you go in there, you're clicking on your image first. And
Please mute yourself, Beverly.
is there an issue? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, we had one participant who left their microphone on. Please continue.
Okay. This right here is a screenshot of the event pages where you're able to look at some of the events that are attached to different folks. And you're able to do some more kind of like filtering. So if you're looking for specific types of events, if you're looking for like births or bills of sale or movement, you're able to filter by event type. You're also able to filter by freedom status. So if you want to look at events for folks who are enslaved, folks who are free, and then like with people, you are also able to filter by locations, like specific plantation, specific county, things of that nature. So if you can see here, there's a gentleman named Frank who has a few records. So I'm going to take a little bit to kind of show you like what Frank's presence looks like on the website. Okay, so this is the record for Frank. The record includes a name, birth dates, a brief biographical description. If we know family relations, it includes family relations. Here we see that Frank is the child of Moses. If Frank himself had children, we would see Frank as a parent of, or if he had a spouse, we would see spouse of. And it also includes places of significance. So Snow Hill Plantation, Eno Plantation, Orange County, and then North Carolina. It then gets into bibliographic citations. So these are the documents where in the collection where you would find mentions of Frank. It gives the title and also the physical location, so folder box number. It shows the freedom status, so Frank was enslaved. A lot of the collections also show the enslaver. And then finally, like kind of like what collection these records are found in. And then below that information, you can see the linked records. So these are all the records in the database that Frank appears. So as you can see, Frank appears in a number of lists, tax lists, inventories, on various plantations. You can also see that there are like non-list event with Frank. So when Frank was relocated from Snow Hill Plantation to Eno Plantation, there's a record from that. Um, there is a a journal that contains a list of deaths, and from there we were able to create records for an illness when Frank got ill in 1843, and then a final record to represent his death. So the idea is that this database can kind of relieve some of the pressure from a finding aid. Like Nancy has talked about, adding the names of enslaved people and, various events to the finding aid, but it's really impossible for that to be exhaustive. So we're kind of looking at this as a way to hold some of that information and be a resource for folks who are looking into information about enslaved people in our collections. So, what we do curating African American family history, it's not limited to slavery era collections. Through the African American Families Documentation Initiative, we are also working to increase the representation of late 19th through 21st century Black families in our collections, and that has involved a lot of outreach um, and just discussing with people about the archive and how um, you know having material in the archive can preserve family stories. So the descendant focused curation, and just kind of broadly work that Sarah does, that Nancy does, has really led to new collecting opportunities when it comes to Black families. For examples, I have, in, different like kind of reference interviews with folks or conversations with folks, I'm able to, communicate that, we're not just interested in the papers of, these white families, the enslaver families, but we're also very interested in the papers of, Black families for all the stories that they are able to shed. Like I said, this work has kind of led to, new avenues. For example, we had a gentleman who wanted to donate a book that he had written about his family history. He wasn't thinking about, oh, my material can belong in an archive. But, I was able to have a conversation with him and find out that he did have some really, amazing letters from his uncle to his grandfather when he was stationed in the Army during World War II. So we were able to create a collection from that. And then also over the summer, just as another example, a descendant of one of the Cameron plantations reached out to me to ask if I had, any idea where she could find information on her ancestors. And I was able to, open up OTG, plug in the name, location, and I, with some help, was able to like narrow down and find her ancestor. And after that, it started a new relationship. And then she contacted us saying that, she had material of her grandmother, who's a descendant of this gentleman, and she was interested in it being a part of the Southern Circle collection, on alongside the papers of the Cameron family. So this work has really, opened up opportunities to not just document material about enslavement, but also more modern day material. And that is the end of my presentation. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to open it up to questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you ever so much for this wonderful presentation. We do have a number of questions in the chat. Now is the time for everyone to jump in and make their inquiries known. I see that Tony has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. This was a very good presentation. And my family was enslaved by the Russians, and they're out of Anson and that whole North Carolina area, and also connected to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. North Carolina. And I was wondering if you all could put me in touch with anyone that's doing research on them, or anyone that's has ties to.
So just thinking to what I have seen coming in as far as requests. So I don't know if Nancy or Megan, if you have heard from any researchers looking at this family's history, but if you could get in touch, we would love to talk with you. And if we haven't yet heard from folks that you may be related to or interested in this history, we could try and help you build a network for sure. And that's something else that we feel really strongly about as far as our service, which is like helping people connect. For
Okay.
sure. Yeah,
How do I
absolutely.
get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So, and I can put it back in the chat or maybe pin it. I put our email addresses, our staff email addresses into the chat, but I'll make sure that everybody can see those and that it's really highlighted for you. Really just feel free to reach out to all of us, and we will take the next steps in the conversation. But we really love to work with you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Yes, I see that Rahab has raised her hand.
Yeah, hi. This is a wonderful. Can you hear me? Great. I've done research around Kentucky, Nicholasville, where the slaves went to get their freedom papers. So they were coming from various locations and winding up in Kentucky and being impressed into the military there. It was one of the major points for distributing, food and whatever to help save the South. What role or how in relationship would North Carolina have in terms of being a place where freedom papers are handed out? And basically, I want to know, why would I want to go here instead of Kentucky, since I don't know what place to begin at? So that's the question. Was North Carolina a point where freedom papers were handed out, or Kentucky? And where would a novice begin to research slave freedom information?
Nancy or Megan, I don't know if you want to jump in. Emancipation papers, so slavery era emancipation papers, I have seen in North Carolina. I've seen them sometimes in family papers, even the papers of enslavers, but very scattered. And so North Carolina may be, maybe a situation where from state to state it really varied. And I, if you could get in touch, we could maybe try and like speak through some of the possibilities, and to hear more about your family background and location. That location is so important. And if you had enslaved ancestors in North Carolina or any other state, we can try and work with you.
Yeah, that's what I would like to know. Is this the best place to begin it? The curiosity is there, but I do know that Kentucky was a major center for all slaves from everywhere walking for miles and miles to get to Kentucky. And where would a person find out if their members went to Kentucky or North Carolina?
Well, I will say during the slavery era, North Carolina was definitely not a destination for seeking freedom, for sure, because of the laws in North Carolina. I mean, free Black people were also regularly enslaved for violating various laws. And so North Carolina was a really punitive state to be in. So emancipation or seeking freedom, oftentimes folks did flee the state unless they were seeking to, reconnect with family members. But oftentimes it was a story of recapture, sadly. So.
And I was just going to chime in to kind of circle back to something that Sarah had mentioned earlier, about whether or not this is the right place to start research. It really is so dependent on what we have and kind of the happenstance of who was in the kind of the network of donors and stuff when a lot of this material was being required.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that, if that's all right, that many of the individuals who were either emancipated or freedom seekers without a legal emancipation sought to go to Ohio It was a large network of free people of color in the state of Ohio, both before and after the Civil War began. So just keep that in mind. That might be a destination worth researching. Okay. All right. There were a number of questions that were in the chat. I think that you did a great job of keeping track of some of those questions. I do see one here that is unanswered, but we discussed before the session began. So Sister Regina says, through my field research, I've learned that Alston is a prominent North Carolina surname. In this work, I'm curious whether Megan Alston has any personal research insights on the name. Thank you.
Hi, Regina. Unfortunately, I do not. But I was telling Shannon, who also has Alstons on his line from North Carolina. My Alstons are from South Carolina. And I did not, from the kind of the Georgetown, Low Country area of South Carolina. And it wasn't until I moved up here for work a few years ago did I realize that there was a large contingent of North Carolina Alsons. So I don't have any insight into that, but I am curious as to if there is any relationship between kind of these two cohorts, the ones that settled in North Carolina and the ones that settled in South Carolina.
Excellent question, excellent answer. Thank you ever so much for that. And I am still scrolling through the various comments and questions that were here. There are many thank yous to the team for the insights about archival research and researching enslavement and slavery and beyond at UNC Chapel Hill and impacting the field. I see that Carla Wills has raised her hand. Carla, you are still muted. Okay, Carla, it appears that, are you there? It doesn't appear that we can hear you, Carla. Okay. Yes, we're getting some feedback, but all right. Oh, we will give you a little time to see what you can do about your audio while we continue to go through some of the comments and questions that have been asked and some that have already been answered. Hob had asked whether there was a software program that translates handwriting. Is this being used? And Nancy was so kind to answer, we are currently testing out several tools. So just in case anyone was wondering, I did not see that question and answer. And Nancy also added that some are good for a quick read that can help you get to the gist of a document. We are working toward accuracy of the whole document. And Nancy, would you like to say more about that?
I can say more about that, but I have a question for all of you. But I'll just say quickly about the AI. I know lots of people have, complicated feelings around artificial intelligence. I absolutely do. And Shannon, I think, replied to one of the messages about we need to train people to be able to read handwriting. And I 100% agree as someone who, grew up in a time when cursive writing was taught in school. And in my case, it was taught by nuns. So there was a point in my life when I had very good handwriting and I could read handwriting really well. But in terms of using artificial intelligence to transcribe, at this point, You know, if you were needing it to just to get the gist of a document, I would not hesitate to use it. If you're looking, I need to find a name, I need to find, you know, sort of dates or names and dates and things that you might really, you know, be able to pick out. I wouldn't hesitate to, you know, use one of the tools just to see if it gets you anywhere. But for what we're doing, you know, if we're gonna put transcription out there, which we do through from the page, we are clear that, you know, we want to be clear that it has been vetted or not vetted, you know, and in terms, or it's been done by, you know, volunteers, but we're not necessarily vouching for every word on it. But I feel okay about that. I feel less okay because of, you know, what we all have heard about AI in terms of hallucinations and whatnot. Like, you know, we would be very careful about putting something out, you know, a transcription that is AI generated and not human reviewed. And so that's why we're working to figure out how to use the models to get to use the tools to get the most accurate thing before we put it out there. Which we're not doing yet. The question I was going to ask all of you is if any of you are familiar with enslaved.org, which is a database similar to On These Grounds, and On These Grounds is compatible with it, but has not yet been integrated into it. It's sort of a down the road project that we're thinking about. The deep dives that I mentioned in my portion, uh, you know, we're uncovering, you know, surfacing the names of enslaved people. And sometimes it's easy to just put it, you know, there's a few names, we put it in the finding aid. But there are many case times where it's a much longer list of, you know, many dozens, you know, 100 names, and it just doesn't make sense to put in the finding aid. And where is a good place to put it? On These Grounds is a possibility, which seems obvious that we would want to do it in this thing, but On These Grounds is a pretty sophisticated tool, and we are hoping that maybe we will down the road be able to use AI to create a simpler, extract names from the finding aid to create a simpler version, which can be used at enslaved.org. But anyway, my basic question is anyone using enslaved.org in their research? Is that part of your world?
So I know that I have encountered it and used it for a few data points, but I am sure there are others who have had some interaction with it and may have more to say about it than I do. So please feel free to raise your hands.
Where's the raised hand thing?
Jennifer?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know what time it is. I just recently looked at enslaved.org, maybe a couple of weeks ago, just playing around with it after hearing an interview on, uh, I believe the Omohundro site, William and Mary. Played around with it, put in one of my enslaver names, and something did come up, but I just haven't spent a lot of time with it. But yes, I am familiar with it. And I had put a question response in there. I don't know if you've gotten to me yet, but
Oh, well, yes, I do see that you have placed a question. If you want to just jump in and ask it, feel free.
all right. Well, I had a chance to visit the library in 2022. I was going back and looking at my notes. Things were still coming out of COVID. So, and I remember I had a consultation, 20-minute consultation online with one of the archivists before my visit. I think they wanted to know what I was looking for, you know, trying to help me out. And I really didn't know what I was doing, but still don't. But I was looking at one particular family papers, the Skinner family papers. I believe it was Joseph A. Blount. Um, and I think there's 6,000 documents. So I just remember being told, and it's been a while, to go into the finding aids and to use like certain keywords to pull up so that you can like kind of pinpoint what box and possibly what file you need. And I just wanted them to see if they could just talk a little bit more about that, being able to use the finding aids at home to prep before you go in person so you're not wasting time, which is so valuable. So thank you.
Not a problem. If anyone would like to supply a response.
I'll jump in. Sarah's gone off camera, so I don't know if she had to step away for a second, but I would typically defer to, oh, there she is. Defer to Sarah on this, as she is a research and instruction librarian, is a first responder. As she's both first responder and like surgeon for this sort of endeavor. But I can tell you that what I am doing is I have worked on the Skinner family papers, and I maybe Blunt, I'm not sure, or Blunt, I think is how it's pronounced. But what I am trying to do now is, if there are pointers to where you might look, I'm trying to highlight them in a way that is much more, look here, records of enslavement here, in this folder. But often our finding aids, I think, as I said before, they were written with scholars in mind who would come in and read the entire collection. If they were interested in, slavery in the 1840s, they would read, from 1835 to 1855, just look at every document and, to get the overview that they're looking for. And they might pick up gems along the way. But now we're trying to rewrite it for different kinds of, researchers who are looking for an ancestor. They don't want to, may or may not have any interest in what the institution was like during the whole of the decade. They are looking for someone who, was trafficked at this in 1846, and where, can we get to that? So I'll just tell you, I would encourage you to read the finding aid as a whole document. Even, you can parachute into a particular section or year, but I think, I'm big on context. I think it's helpful to see the whole picture. And we try to carry description from the top level down to the next level, and the nested dolls idea. But sometimes, an item might get missed, and so I would encourage you to look at the whole thing and, treat it like, doesn't read like a chapter, but read it as if you're, looking to take notes on it. And then of course, never hesitate to come back to us and say, I'm not sure I get what you're talking about. Can you help more? Can you, please don't be afraid to follow up with this doesn't make sense. And how do is there any other way to get to this thing? Sometimes the answer is nope. You just have to, you know, turn the pages and keep looking at the documents. But anyway, I'll let Sarah, if she has better, or Megan, if they have other.
Absolutely. So this question is the question. I mean, it's like, this is the biggest question for trying to get into archives, which is like, to get into archives and access these materials requires being able to navigate this description. And Nancy and Megan and I, like, we are working within a field that has conventions, and like ways, that have been kind of cemented over time. And these ways necessarily need to change. And we are changing it. So through enhanced description and remediation, through curation, like new ways of thinking about like, what are archives? Where are they? Like, what collections should we bring in? And also in my work, which is like, our service can't just start and stop with like, okay, well, here's the collection you want. then like put a box in front of them and like you just read it, right? No, that's not, we can't do it that way. It doesn't work that way. And so like if I mean, I can definitely put on my like teacher hat or like my reference librarian hat, and we could look at a finding aid together. But I will just say that the ways that we have been doing things is there's a collection and the creator, you know, the slavery era papers, it's going to be the name of the enslaver. And then the correspondence is ordered chronologically, and we don't do folder, we do folder level description. So that means that there's a folder for 1840, a folder for 1855 through 1860. So it's ordered chronologically, and we have historically not done more than, I mean, this isn't just us, it's every archive. Like we will put a note that says, you know, topics include this, and this, or famous correspondents who, you know, are white people, you know, are blah, 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 blah. And so this is requiring like us to revisit these finding aids. And also, so for what Nancy is doing to say like, these letters include the names of these people. And then you look at the financial records and it's like also oftentimes chronological, like ledgers, day books, you know, all of these things like in chronological order. Maybe there's some geographic like information that helps you kind of know which one to jump into, but maybe not, oftentimes not. So we're trying to basically come at it from all these angles. Like what I'm trying to do is, because it does require this deep, close read, and that requires time, is I want to work with you and basically like alleviate these obstacles. The description can only go so far. Like if like we would never ever be able to, I mean, Nancy, you tell me, but for these really, really large collections, even Skinner with like 6,000 items, we could not go into every single like list letter from Mary to Bob, 1845. This letter talks about, you know, horses. There's no way that we or any archive, frankly, could ever do that. But we may know that, though, on our end. It may not be in the finding aid, so you may not be able to keyword search it with, you know, like that level of detail. But that's why we encourage you to get in touch with us and think of us as partners. The thing is Nancy's worked really closely with that collection. She, you know, Nancy's had it in front of her. Megan, you know, has brought in a new collection and knows it super well. I, you know, have worked with descendants who have, you know, we've done the same thing. We've already looked at that collection. And on my end, I'm like, I have already found, you know, and transcribed these letters. And that's what we're hoping to do too with the transcription, which is we may not be able to go into that item level, but we will be able to, like, as we get the transcriptions, put that out there, like link from the finding aid to the transcription. Boom. Not only is it digitized, it's transcribed. So you get that item level access as well as like all of this expertise. So don't feel like you have to do it by yourself. But frankly, we are also, I'm not going to speak for Nancy and Megan, but like we are working with and through conventions and ways of working, you know, that go back centuries, frankly, as far as like archival practice. And like we are doing new things. It's just that, you know, we're working within these like institutions and things like that. You know, so that's a really long-winded way to say, like, please, like, don't feel like you have to do this alone. You know, you know, at this point, you know, we're looking at these collections every day, and like literally 98% of the questions I get at this point have something to do with not just genealogy, but like folks with enslaved ancestors. So we are completely diverting like resources and time towards supporting y'all. And so, and we want to hear, like Nancy's saying and Megan's saying, like, we want to talk to you and hear like what's useful to you and do things. So that sounds like a really like, you know, frustrating experience. I would have been frustrated too. But we're rethinking our service model basically. So, but thanks for like, you know, you're helping us do things in new ways. So do get in touch.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It sounds to me like in order for you all to do a finding aid, you would, I mean, you'd have to read these documents too. It's just so time consuming. Just on one more thing in as far as helping and working, if I were to come in and have a few days and I managed to go through a couple of boxes or whatever, is there something that I can do as I'm going through the paperwork and say, oh, this is not mentioned in your finding aid. I just read this. I just saw this piece of paper. How can I help as I'm going through these papers? Because it sounds like I'm going to have to go through a lot of papers. Though I did find some gems while I was there. I did find a farm journal, pages of a farm journal with 150 people listed with names, birth dates, ages, occupations, in family group order. It was part of anyway, I found some stuff. So, but yeah, just how can I help if I'm coming there, which I'm planning on doing in March, um, to help. Thank you.
That's a good question. I really like that idea, and I don't think we have a formalized workflow to kind of represent like researcher discovery like that. But I think if you were to get in touch with, one of us, then, Nancy might be able to, add some description like to the finding aid. But I really like that idea of being willing to share, which will help someone else further down the line.
Is there is there like airport in Chapel Hill?
No, you got to fly to Raleigh, Durham.
It's only
I'm
it's 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes. It's
It's a
not that.
short drive, but you
Yeah,
got
it's
to fly
not
to
that
Raleigh,
bad.
Durham. I've already looked at that.
okay. So I mean, are you guys looking for volunteers in March or?
I just mentioned March because that's when I have some time. So
Okay. All right.
hopefully they won't be on spring break. They'll be open.
But I will say that I know I'm personally I know that I personally am always looking for ways to engage with descendants, and like Nancy has done different kind of like crowdsourcing kind of like events, some of her transcription events, and I definitely think that could be something that we can explore, whether it could be like something like virtual, um where we're doing like a reading and going through and like making notes, or like a in-person type event. um but yeah, I think that's something that we might be interested in.
I just happen to think too, for people who aren't able to and I think Sarah mentioned this, if you're not able to travel, you can request digitization
Okay.
of materials, up to it's not unlimited, but there's a certain amount. And if I think what happens is the digitization team scans and then sends like a PDF maybe of it, and then we make the digitization materials available to everyone through our finding aids. But I mentioned earlier that we use From the Page for transcription. And if that's something you and family members are interested in, we can upload to From the Page, and you have a place to transcribe and save your work and share it with other people. So that's a thing out there that we haven't done a whole lot of that, but that's part of what that I'm sorry, Hawkins Haywood team was doing. And we have a number of other collections that we have not completely not the whole collection digitized, but we've put things up there for Cameron and for Hawkins Haywood and Neil, and just, a whole bunch of different things for people to work on. And some of it is a little more organized than others. Sometimes we just have just people from the general public who have stumbled upon it and they have found something they're interested in, and they, go to town digitizing, or not digitizing, transcribing. So if that's something that is up your alley and you want to work on a specific thing that is not yet digitized, that's another thing to be in touch about. We in fact had kind of a super volunteer who is not connected to the us in any particular way, other than she reached out to we have like a general email address for that goes to our research and instruction team. This super transcriber wrote and said that she wanted more. And so she had gotten really into a particular collection and she was like, isn't there any more? And as it turned out, we did have more, we just hadn't put it up yet. And so, we aim to please is, I guess, maybe a good way to think about us.
All right. Yes, Carla, are you still there? All right. Okay, Carla, if you want to ask your question now, we are happy to attempt to answer it. And there have been a number of very interesting moments in the chat here that I did not want to miss. I just mentioned in the chat that John D. Hawkins was actually a maternal ancestor of singer Natalie Cole and also of Charlotte Hawkins Brown, who was known for her work in education for African Americans much earlier in American history. And that begat a very interesting conversation. But there's also a question about enslaved.org, a place that a number of people in the chat have stated they have worked with the site rather. Carla has asked, does the Hawkins family you are researching include Anne Swepson Hawkins? And does it have ties to a Black young family in Granville County? Do you want to answer that, Nancy?
I wish I could. I'm not. Actually, I was going to defer to you on that one, Shannon. If you have an answer. If you don't have an answer, I'm going to write it down and check in with Renata afterwards.
Okay, I do have a partial answer. I am aware of Anne Swepson Hawkins. I have read that she is connected to the same Hawkins family. But in terms of a connection to the Young family, I have not read that. I've not encountered that. But it's not impossible. The Hawkinses are well known for being very, how should I put it, sociable. So that is my best answer. And perhaps others can provide some additional information. Tony, do you have a question or comment? Okay. So there was also a message on the enslaved.org website that triggered a question regarding the fact that apparently the president's order that the National Endowment for the Humanities essentially shut down anything that was not required has put the enslaved.org team in search of additional funding. And so there's a question here about how any of that might impact the work that is being done by the University of North Carolina. Do we have an answer to that?
I'm sorry, Shannon, could you repeat the question? I was just, I was scrolling, looking for another question and got distracted.
Sure. So to be more succinct, the National Endowment for the Humanities has reduced their operations and funding. How has that had an impact on the University of North Carolina's research in this regard?
I would say there's not a direct impact that I'm aware of at this moment. We have had National Endowment for the Humanities grants in the past, but not recently. More recently, we have had grants, to do, R&D type work, exploring new, innovative ways of working. We've had more connection to the Mellon Foundation. So, they, previous to this AI project we're working on, there was a big project that involved audiovisual material, preservation of audiovisual materials. So, yeah, so it's not great, it's never great when funding like this gets cut. But it does, in this particular case, it's not had a specific impact. But actually, now that I'm talking, I know there's something. So there's another IMLS, which stands for, I'm not sure, something museums and library services. They are, they're separate from NEH, but they also have a very big grant footprint, and we have been impacted by that. There's a they give grants to state libraries, and then state libraries will, dole out grants to individual institutions within the state. And so we have relied on a number of grants, and one of them that we have right now is still currently funded, but it's a digitization grant that is incredibly popular across the state. It allows small repositories and institutions to send materials to University of North Carolina to have them digitized and make them available across this, well, to everyone on the internet. And they've used it for, like, small newspapers have done, I think newspaper has been involved in that, but also yearbooks and all kinds of like tools that, genealogists would find useful. But it's just a super, super popular program that helps public libraries, small museums, small cultural heritage sites digitize their collections and make them more available. And that is in jeopardy. It's not yet been canceled, but it is, everyone is holding their breath around that.
Understood. And that is why it is so important for us to build up our coffers on our own and not necessarily be overly tied to organizations and governments that are perhaps less stable mentally and financially. So on that note, there's another question. Does the UNC Archives have a large collection of documents from slaveholding families from Granville and the surrounding North Carolina counties?
Off the top of my head, I would say I'm not sure large collection of documents would be right. We certainly have records of slaveholding families. And I could not say which ones. This is where Sarah and Megan both had to leave. And Sarah, I would think, would have a good answer, a more specific answer than I do. But this is where the subject headings that I talked about could really come in handy. You would search on slavery or slave records or any one of those examples, dash dash Granville County, North Carolina, and that should bring back, all of the collections that are situated in or have a connection to Granville County and slavery. So, I mean, that's kind of the helpful thing of subject headings. They can bring a lot together.
Yes, and just to touch on a little bit of history regarding that question, it's important to understand that that particular part of North Carolina had the highest concentration of enslaved people during the antebellum era, rather. And so if we're talking about slavery in North Carolina, we cannot talk about it without talking about Warren County, Granville County, and the surrounding counties. So I would suspect that if you're getting documents from slaveholding families from North Carolina, there is going to be something that touches on Granville and the surrounding areas. It's also important to map out how the counties have been created over time so that you can understand the boundaries and what is old and what is new in terms of jurisdictions. And I will stop there with that. Any more questions? And feel free to raise your hands. I think we've covered quite a bit of what is in the chat already. Yes, Rahab.
Yes, I applied on line for this invitation, and it had in the questionnaire, are you a member of or have you applied to become a something? What is that? Just curious. Some association or membership or certified something? What? Please explain.
Absolutely. Not a problem at all. Yes, so the question was essentially asking, have you applied to become a certified descendant of Jesuit enslavement? And so that refers to individuals who can trace their ancestry back to an ancestor who was enslaved by the Jesuits. And that's not just in Louisiana or Maryland, where much of the attention has been for several years, but anywhere. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they were owned by the Jesuits. It could be as simple as being rented or borrowed or hired by the Jesuits. So that's what that refers to. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess I'm supposed to then contact someone and say I found a Jesuit in my.
You can do that if you wish. If you suspect that you have an ancestor who was enslaved by the Jesuits, as I described, yes, feel free to contact the organization and we will take it from there.
Being from Arkansas, and I've gone to Quaker meetings, and I know the relationship that the Quakers have with bringing slavery over here, and then after a certain length of time, asking them to stop. They were very much involved in emancipation, but they also were involved in the creation of the institution coming from England here. How would I know a Jesuit from a Quaker from a, what's this other religious Protestant group?
So again, if you want to research your connection to the Jesuits or to any particular population, religious or otherwise, it's important to follow the same steps that you would even if you did not suspect that there was any such connection. In other words, you have to document where your enslaved ancestor was, who their slaveholder was. Once you have identified the slaveholder, you can begin to understand how and when and where they acquired enslaved people by documenting their transactions and deeds, looking at the wills and estates and probate records of their relatives, their friends, their neighbors, in order to understand how that individual ancestor got there and where they came from before they arrived there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Oh, not a problem at all. And for those who don't know, these types of documents are not only in places such as the Wilson Library, but can also be found on Family Search, where they have their deeds digitized. And the process of researching them, or searching them, I should say, has gotten even easier with the advent of the full text search. You can literally just type in a name and a location, and you will get a bevy of documents, some of which may pertain to your ancestor. And Rahab, I see that your hand is still up. Do you have another question or comment? Okay.
No, no, not at all. Thank you so much.
Not a problem at all. Do we have any more questions or comments? And yes, Nancy, it has been a pleasure having you and the members of your team educate us today about the bevy of resources available at the Wilson Library. And I think that we are all much better for it. And so I am going to do a last call for questions and comments. You can speak now or forever hold your peace.
Hello, I didn't see an option to raise my hand, but I applied to become certified last week, and I just wondered whether or not I would receive some kind of response at some point, no rush, about whether or not I'm invited to proceed.
Excellent question. So I will send your inquiry to the certification committee, and they should be able to send you a response in due time.
Thank you.
Not a problem at all. And I see that Nikki has raised her hand.
Shannon, this was a wonderful presentation. I would like to thank you, Nancy, and her team for everything because I learned so much today, and I can't wait to watch the replay.
All right. And for those of you who might have an interest in visiting Chapel Hill, I do have some hotel recommendations. But perhaps my hotel recommendations are not the same as Nancy's hotel recommendations. I enjoyed my stay at the Duke Hotel. I know it has a longer name than that, but it also has a wonderful little golf course and things like that if you want to make it a longer trip. But I'm sure there are probably much more convenient accommodations in Chapel Hill proper. You'll notice in the chat I mentioned the term 30 North Carolina minutes because I'm used to people telling me, oh, something is 15 minutes away or 30 minutes away. And then as I am en route to my destination, I learned that the estimate was a bit short. So just be ready for that. If someone says 30 minutes, be prepared for an hour. If someone says 15, be prepared for 45 minutes or longer. Just my experience. Any more comments or questions before we close out today's event? All right. If there is nothing else, I will say thank you once again to our presenters, as well as to the audience for joining us. And we do intend to have more events in the future. So stay tuned. We will ensure that everyone gets a link to the recorded video. And if you have any additional questions, comments, or just want to chat, feel free to email us. And again, thank you so much. Have a super Saturday and a wonderful weekend.